Ava Lawson had always believed that hard work was the key to success. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Baltimore, she watched her parents work tirelessly to make ends meet. From a young age, Ava understood that nothing in life was given, it was earned. Determined to rise above her circumstances, she worked 2 jobs to put herself through college, eventually landing a career in marketing. By her late 20s, Ava had built a life she was proud of. Her career was thriving, but her personal life remained a different story. Relationships came and went, but none of them were lasting. She had been engaged once before, but the trust she placed in her fiancé was shattered when she discovered his betrayal. By the time Ava reached 40, she had all but given up on the idea of finding love. She focused on her career, convinced that a fulfilling life didn't need a partner or children. But at 42, something miraculous happened. Ava found love when she least expected it. Her relationship with Damian Pierce felt like a dream come true. He was everything she had longed for, caring, attentive, and supportive. Soon, Ava was pregnant with a child she had once thought impossible. Her career was flourishing, her relationship strong, and her future seemed brighter than ever. But just as Ava's dreams were finally within reach, a single moment would change everything. A small decision, an innocent post on social media, would expose a terrifying truth, and in that instant, Ava's happiness would shatter. What she thought was the beginning of a perfect life would turn into a tragedy that no one could have predicted. It was at a networking event in Washington, D.C. where Ava met him. Surrounded by business executives and industry professionals, she didn't expect to find someone who would change her life. But there he was, Damian Pierce. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a calm confidence that instantly drew her in. Their conversation began with small talk, the usual banter at a crowded event, but there was something different about him. Unlike the usual men Ava encountered, who were quick to boast or try to impress, Damian simply listened. He asked thoughtful questions, genuinely interested in her life and experiences. They spoke for hours, laughing together and connecting in a way Ava hadn't felt in a long time. In the weeks that followed, their relationship blossomed quickly. Damian seemed too perfect to be true, attentive, caring, and seemingly always there when Ava needed him. He remembered the little things, like the way she took her coffee or the stories from her childhood that she had long forgotten. He was patient and understanding, never pushing her to move faster than she was comfortable with. As their connection deepened, Ava found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone before. It felt effortless, natural, as though they were 2 pieces of a puzzle fitting perfectly together. Damian's attention made her feel special, like she was the only person in the world that mattered. But there was one thing that nagged at Ava. Damian was always very private about his past. He never mentioned his family, his childhood, or where he had lived before moving to D.C. His lack of a social media presence made Ava curious, but Damian was firm on one point. "I don't trust those platforms," he would say. "Too much of your life gets out there. I prefer to keep my world offline." Ava found his strict no social media rule strange, but she didn't question it. She respected his privacy, and at the time, it felt refreshing. She didn't need to know every detail about his past. What mattered was the here and now. Then, something she never thought would happen. Ava became pregnant. At 42, after years of doctors telling her it would be nearly impossible, she was carrying a child. She was both terrified and overjoyed, unsure of how to process the miracle unfolding in her life. She never thought she would experience motherhood, but now it was happening, and it felt like a dream come true. Her excitement quickly grew as they began planning their future together. With Damian by her side, she felt ready to take on the world. They talked about the baby, the wedding, their future as a family. For the first time in a long time, Ava truly believed that everything she had dreamed of, love, family, a future, was finally within her reach. But as Ava's happiness grew, so did her unease. There were small, fleeting moments when she wondered about Damian's past. But for the most part, she let those doubts fade. She had her family, her love, and her future. It seemed too perfect to question. What Ava didn't know was that the happiness she thought she had was about to unravel in a way she could never have imagined. Ava sat on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light across her living room. Beside her, Damian sat quietly, his arm around her as they gazed at their ultrasound picture. She could feel the excitement bubbling inside her, the anticipation of a future she had long thought was out of reach. A miracle was happening, she was going to be a mother. And soon, she would marry the man she thought was perfect for her. For months, Ava had respected Damien's wishes about keeping their relationship private. He had made it clear, no social media, no photos shared online. People don't realize how much they expose about themselves. It's not safe, he would say. Ava had understood. He was careful, private, and in the beginning, she thought it was refreshing. But tonight was different. She had never felt so full of joy, so alive. The engagement ring on her finger sparkled as she smiled at Damien, and the reality of the life they were about to build together felt so real. She had spent years watching others share their happiness, their milestones, and for once, it was her turn. She had a fiancé she loved, a baby on the way, and a future that felt so perfect. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling slightly with excitement as she opened her social media app. She couldn't resist. Just this once, she wanted to share the joy with the world. She clicked on the camera icon, positioning the phone to capture both her and Damien in the soft light. Her face glowed with happiness, her engagement ring prominent on her finger. She was overwhelmed with love. "Dreams really do come true," Ava typed as the caption, "blessed, engaged, and expecting our miracle. Love wins." With a deep breath, she pressed post. At first, everything felt exactly as it should. The notifications flooded her phone, messages from friends, family, and acquaintances, all congratulating her. "So happy for you. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Congratulations, Ava. This is so beautiful." Ava smiled as she scrolled through the comments, her heart swelling with each message. This was the moment she had waited for, and it felt like everything was falling into place. But then, her finger froze. A comment buried beneath the sea of congratulations caught her eye. It wasn't full of joy or excitement. It stood out, cold and unsettling. "Is this not the man who killed his fiancée and disappeared? Look up Damien Washington." Ava's breath caught in her throat. Her pulse quickened as she blinked, trying to process what she was seeing. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the name of the person who had left the comment, expecting to find a faceless troll, a comment meant to ruin her happiness. But what she found was far more chilling. The account was real. The woman's profile was filled with family pictures, posts from her life, nothing that screamed fake or malicious. Ava's heart began to race as she opened the link attached to the comment. Her stomach churned as a news article loaded on her phone. The headline sent a shockwave through her body. "Fugitive on the run for the murder of Bianca Lon." Her hands went cold as she read the details. Bianca Lon, another woman who had once loved Damien, had been found murdered in her apartment, strangled in her sleep. The man who had been her fiancé, Damien Washington, was now a fugitive, on the run from the law. Ava felt the world around her begin to tilt. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. Damien had told her everything about his past, hadn't he? He'd been private, yes, but that was just because he valued privacy, not because he had something to hide. Her hands shook as she stared at the article, at the photo of Damien, not Damien Pierce, but Damien Washington, staring back at her, the face of a man she thought she knew, now connected to a past she couldn't understand. Her fingers hovered over her phone, heart pounding in her chest. Was this a cruel joke? Or had she truly been living with someone who had a dark, deadly secret? She couldn't breathe, couldn't think clearly as the room seemed to close in around her. The comments continued to roll in, congratulating her on her perfect life. But Ava didn't see them. All she could focus on was the name, the article, and the horrible realization sinking in. The man she loved, the man she thought would be her forever, was not who he said he was. One post. One moment of joy. And now everything was shattered. Ava's hands went clammy as she scrolled further down the article, revealing details of the investigation. The police had been unable to track him. His life had been a series of lies, of disappearing acts, each time leaving no trace behind. He had perfected the art of escape. But now, Ava knew. The person she had trusted most, the man who had become her everything, had been living in the shadows of a dark past, running from his crimes for years. How had she missed it? How had she been so blind to the man standing before her? Her heart pounded, the weight of the discovery sinking in like a cold, heavy stone. She hadn't just fallen in love with a man. She had unknowingly fallen for a killer, a man who had already taken one life and was now living a lie with her. Damien had made sure his past stayed hidden, cloaked in secrecy. But Ava's post, her moment of happiness shared with the world, had been the spark that ignited everything. Her joy had exposed him, and now, the man she loved was no longer the person she thought he was. As she sat there, staring at the article, the full horror of the situation sank in. Ava had unknowingly walked into the arms of a man who had already killed once. And now, she was left to question everything she thought she knew about her life, her future, and the man she had chosen to trust. Ava's hands shook as she put down her phone, the article still glaring at her in the dim light. Every word, every detail about Damien's past sent a wave of nausea through her. She couldn't breathe. Her heart pounded as she turned to face him, her fiancé, the man she thought would be the father of her child, the man she loved. Damien was sitting on the couch, casually flipping through a magazine, completely unaware of the storm that was building within Ava. She stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to gather the strength to speak, to confront him with the truth she had just uncovered. Damien, her voice trembled, the words barely escaping her lips. We need to talk. He looked up at her, a slight smile tugging at his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. What's wrong? He asked, sensing something was off but too calm to be concerned. You never told me about your past, Ava said, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and disbelief. She could feel the anger building, but it was buried beneath the layers of shock. Why didn't you tell me about Bianca? Damien's expression faltered for a brief second, but he quickly masked it. Bianca? He repeated, his voice smooth, almost indifferent. What about her? Ava's hands clenched into fists as she stepped closer. She's dead, Damien. And you're the one who killed her. His eyes flashed, but only for a moment. He was quick to regain his composure. You don't know what you're talking about, he said dismissively, as if it were a minor misunderstanding. Ava took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The anger bubbled up inside her, but it was mixed with a deep, gnawing fear. I know everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know what you did to her. And I know you've been running ever since. You've been hiding from the law, and from me. Damien's eyes locked onto hers, cold and unyielding. The mask of the perfect fiancé, the attentive lover, slowly started to slip. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend himself. He didn't say a word. And in that silence, Ava realized something far worse than the truth of his past. He didn't care. Why didn't you tell me? Ava choked out. Why did you lie? Why did you let me believe you were someone you're not? Damien's posture shifted slightly, but his voice remained calm, controlled. Because you didn't need to know, he said. What does it matter now? Ava stumbled back, her heart sinking into her stomach. Her body trembled as the realization hit her with full force. Damien didn't flinch. His gaze never wavered. You killed her because she found out who you really were, and you were going to kill me too, weren't you? Damien leaned back, his eyes darkening as he met her gaze. You were perfect, Ava. But you didn't listen to me. I told you to stay off social media. You made a mistake. Ava took a step back, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The man she had trusted, the man she had thought was her future, was a murderer. He had killed once, and now, he was willing to kill again. Damien stood up, taking a step toward her. He moved slowly, deliberately. His presence felt suffocating. It's already done, Ava, he said softly. You can't undo what you've done. Ava's heart hammered in her chest, her instincts screaming at her to run, to get out, but her legs felt like jelly. I need to leave, she whispered, her voice trembling with terror. Damien's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with brutal force. You're not going anywhere. Her body tensed, the fear flooding every part of her. She pulled at his grip, but it was no use. He was too strong. His voice was low, cold, and final. You shouldn't have found out. Now you've ruined everything. Her eyes widened as she struggled to free herself. The man she thought she loved, the man who had promised her a future, had already taken another life, and he was ready to take hers too. Please, Ava begged, her voice cracking. Let me go. But Damien's grip tightened. "I'm sorry, Ava," he said, his words devoid of remorse. "You shouldn't have posted that picture." In that moment, Ava realized the full horror of her situation. She was trapped. She had been living with a killer. And now, she didn't know if she would make it out alive. Ava's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest as the gravity of the situation began to settle in. She had just confronted the man she loved, the man she thought was her future, about the horrifying truth of his past. And now, standing before her, Damien was no longer the charming fiancé who had swept her off her feet. Her body trembled as the terror swept over her. She needed to get out. She needed to run. She turned toward the door, every instinct screaming for her to flee. But as she reached for the doorknob, she felt it, Damien's hand grabbing her arm, yanking her back with frightening force. "No," he said, his voice cold, flat, devoid of any affection. "You're not going anywhere." Ava's breath hitched, her heart racing faster. She struggled, trying to free herself from his grip, but it was like trying to break free from a vice. His fingers dug into her skin, unrelenting and strong. "Let go of me, Damien." Ava cried out, her voice panicked, the fear flooding every inch of her being. But instead of letting go, his grip tightened, his expression shifting into something darker, something more dangerous. His eyes, once tender, now held a chilling emptiness. The man she thought she knew, the man who had promised to protect her, was gone. In his place stood someone else, a cold, calculating stranger who saw her not as a partner, but as a threat. Ava tried to pull away again, but this time, Damien shoved her backwards with a force that took her breath away. Her back slammed against the wall, the impact knocking the air out of her lungs. She gasped for breath, disoriented, but she didn't have time to recover. Damien was already upon her. His eyes were locked on hers, no hint of remorse in his expression. "You had to find out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now you've ruined everything." Ava tried to scream, but her throat tightened in panic. She reached for her phone, desperate to call for help, but Damien was faster. He grabbed her hand before she could reach it, his grip suffocating as he twisted her arm behind her. Her mind raced. She had to escape. She had to find a way out. But every move she made was met with a violent push, each one bringing her closer to the cold, unfeeling man standing before her. She could see it in his eyes, he wasn't just angry, he was calculated. He was in control. "Damien, please," she begged, her voice cracking as her body trembled with fear. "Don't do this. Please." But it was too late. The man who had promised her the world was now the one who was going to take it all away. With a speed and force that took Ava by surprise, Damien shoved her again, this time harder. She stumbled, losing her balance, and crashed to the floor. Her head hit the ground with a sickening thud, and the world spun around her. Through the haze of pain and confusion, she saw Damien standing over her, his face unreadable. And then, without warning, he lunged. His hands were around her throat in an instant, his fingers tightening like a vice. Ava's body convulsed as she fought for air, her hands clawing at his, trying desperately to break free. But there was nothing. The room felt smaller, suffocating. Her vision blurred at the edges as her breaths became shorter and more desperate. The realization hit her with a brutal finality, this was it. She had trusted him, believed in him, and now she was paying the price for that trust. With every passing second, the darkness closed in. She kicked, she twisted, but it was like fighting a shadow. There was no escape. Ava's vision darkened, her head spinning as she struggled to hold on to consciousness. Her strength began to fade, her limbs growing weaker. The world around her seemed to disappear, leaving only the suffocating pressure around her throat. And then, everything went black. In that final moment, Ava understood the truth. She had been living with a man who had killed before, and now, he had taken her life too. The silence in Ava's apartment was deafening. The only sound was the distant hum of the city outside, a city unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded behind closed doors. Ava Lawson was gone, her life stolen by the very man she had loved and trusted. But for her family, friends, and the authorities, the search for answers had just begun. When the police arrived at the scene, it was clear that this wasn't a typical crime. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. It was a calculated act, a brutal killing that left behind only confusion and horror. Ava's body lay still on the floor, and as the officers combed through the apartment, the key to unlocking the mystery of her death was in plain sight: her phone. The detectives quickly discovered Ava's social media account and the post she had shared just hours before her death. Her engagement photo. Her ultrasound picture. A caption that had been filled with love and joy. It was the last thing she had shared with the world before her life was taken. But there was one comment buried beneath the sea of congratulations that caught the attention of the investigators. Is this not the man who killed his fiancée and disappeared? Look up Damian Washington. The comment wasn't a random accusation. It was a trail, a thread that had led the police straight to the heart of the case. The detectives immediately ran a search on the name. Within moments, they had found the truth. Damian Washington wasn't just some business consultant who had swept Ava off her feet. He was a fugitive. A murderer who had been running from his past for years. The investigation began to move fast. Detectives traced Damian's movements using Ava's post and the digital footprints left behind. The location tag on Ava's photo, the timestamps, the internet searches, they all painted a picture of a man who had been hiding in plain sight, lying his way into Ava's life. Authorities dug into his history, and the truth began to unfold. Damian had changed his name, severed all ties to his past, and created a new identity, but his criminal history couldn't be erased. The murder of Bianca Lon, a woman he had once been engaged to, had gone unsolved for years. But Ava's social media post, her innocent desire to share her joy, had exposed him. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Ava had unknowingly shared her happiness with the world, and in doing so, she had inadvertently unmasked a killer. The post, once a symbol of her new beginning, had become the very thing that would bring her killer to justice. The authorities acted swiftly. Within hours, they had tracked Damian's whereabouts to a nearby city, and a team was dispatched to arrest him. The moment he was caught, his indifference was chilling. He didn't struggle, didn't fight. He simply surrendered, as if he knew it was only a matter of time before his past would catch up with him. Damian Washington, the man who had once been Ava's perfect match, was finally in custody. But for Ava's family, friends, and everyone who had known her, it was too late. Her life had been stolen by the very man who had promised to build a future with her. And now, they could only grieve and ask themselves the same question. How could Ava, in her joy and love, have been the one to expose the man who had ended her life? The arrest was swift. Damian Washington, the man who had once seemed so perfect, was now behind bars. His face remained as calm as ever, his eyes cold, as if he hadn't just been captured for the murder of Ava Lawson and the gruesome crime of Bianca Lon years before. To him, this was just another day in a life spent evading justice. Detective Malik Rhodes watched him closely as he was led into the interrogation room, his mind already working, analyzing every detail. Damian was handcuffed, but he carried himself with a certain arrogance, as if he knew he was in control. It wasn't the first time Rhodes had seen someone like him, calm, collected, almost too calm for someone who had just been arrested for murder. Rhodes closed the door behind him and sat across from Damian, who was already leaning back in his chair, unfazed by the gravity of the situation. Mr. Washington, Rhodes began, his voice steady but sharp, you've been arrested for the murder of Ava Lawson. We have more than enough evidence to convict you, including your digital footprint, your involvement in the death of Bianca Lon, and your connection to Ava's murder. Damian's eyes met his, but there was no fear, no sign of guilt, just an icy calmness that sent a chill down Rhodes' spine. I didn't kill anyone, Damian replied flatly, his voice smooth, as if reading from a script. You don't know what you're talking about. Rhodes leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. We know everything, Damian. You've been on the run for years, hiding behind false identities, manipulating women, and killing those who got too close to your secrets. Bianca Lon was just the first. Ava was the second. So let's talk about her. Let's talk about why you killed her. Damian didn't flinch. He stared at the detective, his expression unreadable. She wasn't supposed to find out, he said, his tone still disturbingly calm. I told her to stay out of my business, to stay off social media. She didn't listen. She should have known better. Rhodes felt a flicker of anger at Damian's nonchalance, but he kept his composure. She trusted you, Damian. She loved you. And you killed her because she found out the truth about who you really are. A man with a history of violence, a man who's been running from the law for years. Damian's lips curled slightly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He was playing a game, one he had mastered over the years. Ava was perfect, you know. She was everything I wanted, he said, almost casually. But she was also a liability. When you've spent as long as I have running from your past, you can't let anyone get too close. She became a threat, and I had to deal with it. Rhodes stared at him, trying to process the chilling indifference in Damien's voice. You killed her to protect your lies. But what about Bianca? Rhodes pressed. She wasn't the first woman to trust you. What did you do to her? Damien's expression remained cold, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps discomfort, perhaps something else. She got greedy, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. She wanted to expose me. She thought she could turn me in. She didn't understand who I was, what I had to do to survive. She got in my way. So I made sure she wouldn't ruin everything. The coldness in his voice sent a shiver down Rhodes' spine. Damien wasn't remorseful. He wasn't even apologetic. He was simply pragmatic, a man who saw his actions as necessary to maintain control. Rhodes leaned back, watching him carefully. So you've been running all your life. You've lived this lie, this double life, and now, it's caught up to you. You didn't care who you hurt, as long as you kept your secrets safe. Damien didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Rhodes, his face expressionless. Finally, he spoke, his words calculated and cold. I did what I had to do. It's over now, isn't it? You've got me. But you won't get anything more out of me. Rhodes nodded, understanding the game Damien was playing. He wasn't going to confess. He wasn't going to show any remorse. But the truth was already out. The case was built, and Damien was done running. His past had finally caught up with him. As the detective stood to leave, he gave Damien one last look. Damien remained seated, staring ahead, as if this was just another day in the life of a man who had killed without consequence. But this time, the game was over. Damien would no longer be able to hide from the crimes he had committed. Damien Washington sat silently in the interrogation room, his face unreadable, his eyes cold. The police had caught him, but it was as if he wasn't even fazed. His hands were cuffed, but he carried himself with an unsettling calm, as if this was just another inconvenience. Detective Malik Rhodes stood across from him, his eyes locked on the man who had murdered Ava Lawson and evaded justice for years. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Damien Washington, the man who had once seemed perfect, was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of Ava Lawson and Bianca Lawson. His lies had been unraveled, his cold indifference on full display in the courtroom. Yet, even as he was sentenced to life without parole, the damage had already been done. Ava, the woman who had fought so hard for happiness, was gone. Her future, her dreams of a family, stolen by a man who had carefully crafted a life of lies. Her loved ones, her friends, and her family could only mourn the life she would never get to live, the wedding she would never have, the child she would never hold in her arms. Her story serves as a chilling reminder. Sometimes, the person who seems perfect, the one who loves you, who promises you everything, might be hiding something far darker than you could ever imagine. Ava trusted Damien, and in her trust, she unknowingly exposed the lies that would cost her everything. In the end, the truth came to light, but it came too late. Ava had already paid the ultimate price for believing in the man she thought she knew. And now, we are left with a question to reflect on. How well do you really know the person next to you? Could you spot the warning signs if the person you trust, the person you love, had a dark side you didn't see coming? It's easy to overlook the red flags, to ignore the subtle hints that something isn't quite right. But Ava's tragic fate reminds us that sometimes, the most dangerous person in our lives is the one who seems too perfect to be true. So, take a moment. Look at the people around you, the ones you trust. How well do you really know them? Are there things you've overlooked, things you've dismissed, thinking it was nothing? Don't trust too easily. And most importantly, don't let someone's perfection blind you to the truth that might be hiding just beneath the surface. What do you think? Do you think you could spot the warning signs if something was off in your own life? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, we'd love to hear from you. If this story has made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one you least suspect.